Joining me now is Carol Drinkwater, the actress and author, and she's come to talk to me about her fabulous books about an olive farm. Carol, welcome. What really inspired me when I was looking at your books was the story of how you actually found the olive farm. Could you tell us about that? Because it's quite a lovely story, isn't it?
It's a love story. I mean, it's a love story that began with a man, then became a house, and then became a tree. Michel was the executive producer, but I'd never met him. And then when I'd finished my filming, I went up to Sydney to do a bit of publicity for the series, and he was staying in the same hotel. And he said, let's have a drink in the bar, which we did. And he said, will you have dinner tomorrow evening with me? And I said, I'm not free. And he said, oh, well, I'm leaving town after that. And my dinner then got cancelled. We ended up having dinner together, and he asked me to marry him on that first date.
Wow.
So that's the beginning of this love story. It begins with a, then we came back to Europe, and I didn't accept him, by the way, not straight away. Then we came back to Europe, and about 6 months later, he was going down to Cannes for the television festival and said, would I like to spend a week with him, which I did. I'd been looking everywhere all over the world for what I described as my house by the sea. So while he was busy doing all the deals on the Croisette, I thought, well, I'll look for a house here. So I went into some of the estate agents and I said I was looking for a house by the sea, and they said, mais bien sûr, madame, this is the south of France. I said, how much have you got to spend? And I told them. They said, well, not for that money, madam, sorry. So eventually we went up at the end of the week, and Michel came with me. We went up into the hills and they showed what was on offer for that money. And then Michel said, well, which was very uninspiring, and Michel said, well, haven't you got a ruin? And he took us to, he said, I know of an olive farm and a vineyard that is for sale. I don't represent it. It's been squatted. It's been empty for 10 years, but I can take you there. There's no gates, So we went to this place, and it was a jungle either side as we went up this winding drive, and this just in the hills behind Cannes, beautiful late April day, this cream balustraded building halfway up the hillside. And we were madly in love. We didn't have any money, but it was 8 times my price.
And was Appassionata the name of the farm already, or was that a name you gave it?
You shouldn't be asking that.
Oh, but go on, tell me.
It's a name I gave it.
I did wonder, because all of your books talk about it being a love story.
Yeah.
And the love story of both you and Michel, the love story of the farm. And it's such a lovely juxtaposition, isn't it, the whole thing?
Yeah. I mean, for anyone who's listening who doesn't, Appassionata is Italian, of course, for with passion.
Of course.
So, yes, no, I chose that name.
This book, The Olive Tree, is the second in this series, isn't it?
What happened was a long way into let's say 12 years into our story, after we were married and everything, Michel and I were involved in a terrible car accident, and they actually initially thought that he was dead, and then indeed found he wasn't, thank God. But we split up during the healing process, his healing process. We split up, and he left the farm. And I thought all my dreams, by then we had olive oil from our olive trees, and we have an AOC, an Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, for the oil. So it looked like I'd got the perfect life, the wonderful man, blah, 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 etc. And then he was in this accident and left, and I decided to stay on because I'd learnt of the tenacity of the olive tree, the regenerative force of nature. I thought, I'm going to stay here. And it was during that period that I wrote the trilogy, to keep faith with my own story, the trilogy being the olive farm, olive season, olive harvest, which is the story of us finding the place, falling in love, creating the oil, getting the AOC, etc., etc. I didn't know how the trilogy would end when I began to write it. I didn't know if we'd get back together again. My editor didn't know, my agent, nobody knew what had happened. I didn't tell anybody the end of the story. I just hoped that there would be a happy ending. And indeed, there was a happy ending, but during the period of time, which was about 2 years, I think, that I was there on my own, I couldn't go off and do any acting because somebody had to look after the farm, and we planted young olive trees, etc. During that period of time, I started to ask myself, where does the olive tree come from? Because they were my friends on the farm, the trees, as it were. And I discovered that UNESCO was doing a project called the Olive Heritage Trail, that they were going to create around the Mediterranean, the ancient heritage of the Mediterranean, the roots of trade that were originally ploughed to bring the olive tree to the Western Mediterranean, the Northern Mediterranean, etc. And I went to see UNESCO and said, look, I want to do this journey. And they kind of said, well, who the hell are you?
Didn't they know who you are?
No, they didn't know me. So they sent me away, and I said, well, I'll do the journey anyway. So I set out to write 2 books called The Olive Route, R-O-U-T-E, and The Olive Tree, 3, this new one, which is just out now. And these 2 books are my journey around the Mediterranean. I spent 14 months or 16 months out of 2 years. I went around the Eastern Mediterranean first because the Iraq War had started by the time I actually really got going. And I feared that if I didn't do the East first, I thought all the clues to the ancient trees might be destroyed. And then this new one is the Western Mediterranean. It's all the wonderful countries like Spain and Italy and Morocco and Algeria, indeed, where I got caught in Al-Qaeda bombings. But I mean, it's been the 2 years, almost 2 years, because I came backwards and forwards a little bit, have been, nobody can take this journey away from me. It's been an absolutely extraordinary experience. I found in Lebanon olive trees that are over 6,000 years old, and they're still fruiting, they're still being farmed, they're still being pressed for oil. They're in the Christian hills behind Byblos. So, and that was almost at the very beginning. That was like day 4 of my journey, of this 2-year journey. So it's been an extraordinary experience of discoveries. In this new book, I've come face to face with the problems of the future, the Mediterranean's water problems, intensive farming, etc. So it's been a life-changing experience, these 2 books, absolutely.
Carol, thank you for coming in. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
I found Carol's story absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to read the book. You can find details of the book on our website, thebookchannel.tv. After the break, I'll be talking to Jane Streeter, director of Lowdham Book Festival, and I'll also be talking to Stephen Booth.